Troy Alexander, To Live and Die in the Time of Mayhem. By Victor Robinson II. Opening song, The Death of Peace of Mind by Bad Omens. 3 months later, after the events in Gun Heavy and 3 years before Downfall 2. Troy Alexander is working for a protective agency led up by a man named Charlie Carlson, who doesn't know only working for him to be in place for when Victor Stormer and Vincent Russo, the man who killed the woman he loved, Hannah, come for Charlie for betraying them, and the Winner Circle, the biggest international crime syndicate. While working for Charlie, Troy found out that the supernatural forces are real. The last mission with Charlie and the rest of the gang. Troy had helped them take on the Devil's Six, a group that consists of 2 vampires, a hybrid werewolf, a demon, a hell goddess, a supernatural killer named Soul Taker, whomever he kills he takes their souls, and a superhuman killer named Jason Ashford, who couldn't die until he was finally killed by Troy's buddy in the gang, Danny Downfaller Madsen, who was granted superhuman strength through a blood transfusion from an unknown donor when he was a teenager, when he was drained of blood by a band of vampires he tracked down later. Troy handled this newfound world with ease, but it made him stronger, and he relished in it, using all his skills from his training and his missions with MI6, and he has grown fond of his friendship with these people, who he working with that he know calls his family. After the business with the Devil's Six, Troy had to rescue a former girlfriend, Alexis, and CIA agent Bill Stevens in Pakistan after a mission went south. A terrorist named Hassan has Alexis and Bill hostage with bags on their heads. And their demands aren't met in 1 hour, they will be beheaded on camera. Troy, armed with an assault rifle and a duffel bag of C4, and he uses C4 on a van to cause a distraction, and blows up the van, and men come running out the building, and Troy opens fire all the terrorists coming out of the building and mows them down. Hassan is very uneasy after seeing his men being blown away by a hail of gunfire. Troy goes inside the building and Troy pulls out his knife, and more men are running through the halls, and Troy is slicing through these men. Bodies are dropping and blood is being spilled all over the floor. Troy has blood all over his face. Troy walks to in the room with Hassan, has a machete to Alexis's head. Hassan looks at Troy and tells him to drop his gun, or she's dead, and Troy drops the gun and throws the knife at Hassan's head, and Hassan dies instantly. Troy pulls off the bag off Alexis, and Alexis says, "Troy Alexander, you came for me." Troy says, "When I always said I would be there if you needed me. I meant it." 1 month later, a man and woman entered the movie theater with their 18-year-old daughter and 14-year-old son with popcorn and drinks in their hands, and they sit down, and they also start watching the previews. A gang of people wearing Halloween masks walk into the movie theater and pulls out knives, and they starts to attack the people in the lobby, and then one woman tries to leave and another person shows up in front of her wearing a white hockey mask and has a hat kit in his right hand and hits the woman in the face. The blade goes through her jawline, and she falls to the floor, screaming, coming out of the lobby, and it is masked by the sound of the movies coming out of the lobby. The man goes into the lobby to go to restroom with his son, and he goes out into the hallway, and he sees people getting killed in the lobby and bodies everywhere. The man with his son runs back into the movie theater, and he is yelling, "They are killing everyone, we need to go." The man is causing a loud disturbance, and his wife and daughter get up, and a woman with blood all over her body running into the room, and 2 masked people followed her into the room. They are stabbing everyone in their path. The man tells his son to run, Mom and Amanda, and the man attacks the 2 masked people, and more masked people shows up at the emergency exits. People are fighting back. The man is attacked by the white hockey masked man, whose mask has blood all over it, and the man is hacked to death by him. People are wounded and dying around the theater. The masked people attack Amanda, her mom and her son, and they are stabbed and slashed on, and one of the wounded people pulls out a gun and shoots at the masked people, and they retreat it throughout the emergency exits, and the white hockey mask looks back at Amanda, then leaves. Troy is having a romantic dinner with Alexis in Paris, who had rekindled their relationship. Alexis has been suffering PTSD from happen in Pakistan. Troy has been doing a lot to make her forget about her almost dying. After dinner, Troy takes Alexis to a French art museum and Alexis is enjoying looking at the art. Troy's mobile start ringing and Troy picks up the phone, and it's Sheriff Kincaid, and she tells her that Violet and kids have been attacked and her husband David is dead. She tells him about the attack and what happened. Troy is concerned with tears in his eyes and he turns to Alexis and says we got to go. Troy calls Bill Stevens and tells him he needs a favor. Hours later Troy and Alexis gets off the plane in Santa Clara, California. Bill meet up with Troy at a coffee shop and shows him footage of the attacks at the movie theater. Bill has called the FBI field office in L. They are sending their best agent Billy Hill in the area, and he gives the file to Troy. Bill says he was forced into retirement after the whole FBI field office in L. was slaughtered 5 years ago by a cult of killers who had called themselves the Rising of the Thorn aka ROTT. But Billy killed all the members of the ROTT. Billy is an expert on serial killers. They brought him back on 3 years ago, rehired him, after he took down a group of survivalists, while trying to recapture escaped serial killer Miles Ramsey. Bill says he explains since the FBI field office in L. is understaffed that CIA is sending over their best. So you and him will work together, and finding these bastards, and Bill shakes Troy's hands and tells him good luck. Troy and Alexis shows up at the hospital. Troy notices Sheriff Abby Kincaid, who he met a couple years ago, at a Thanksgiving party he attended with Violet and her family. Anyway, Troy and Alexis walks past her in her deputies, who are conducting their investigation. Troy and Alexis walk into Violet's hospital room, which she shares with her daughter Amanda and son Kevin. Violet is happy to see Troy, and she calls him Brian, and Troy tells Alexis that his family and town knows him by the name Brian. Violet has stitches all over her back from shield knife blows from Kevin. Violet tells him David is dead, and she starts crying. Alexis has tears in her eyes, as sees the wounds on the little boy, and she steps out of the hallway. Troy hugs Violet, and she tells him that Kevin's right was destroyed in the attack. Amanda wakes up and sees her Uncle Brian talking to her mom. Amanda calls out to Uncle Brian, who is also her godfather, and he looks at her, and she has been slashed across her face and chest and stabbed in the stomach. Troy is consoling his family, and he is telling them that he is here now, and he will find out who did this and will make them pay. Alexis comes back in the room and Troy introduces her to them as his girlfriend. Agent Billy Hill shows up and sees Troy talking to his family. Agent Billy Hill walks into Violet's hospital room and introduces himself. Troy stands up and introduces himself to Billy. Billy expressed his condolences to Violet and her family. Billy walks into the hallway and asks Troy to come with him. Troy tells Alexis to stay with his family. Troy kisses Alexis and leaves. Violet tells Alexis that Brian can take care of himself. Alexis sits by Violet's side, and she says, "I am so sorry for what happened to your family, and I hate we met under these circumstances." Violet says, "The only thing I am worried about is Kevin. His right kidney was very damaged in the attack." Violet starts crying, saying, "I tried to protect them." Alexis hugs Violet to comfort her, and Amanda hugs her mom also. Billy tells Troy that he believes the killers are coming to the hospital to finish what they started. Troy says, "How do you know that?" Billy says, "I got a buddy in the cyber department, who has been monitoring the dark web, which has picked up a lot of clatter since last night about the massacre at the movie theater. These motherfuckers want a big body count." The guy who was doing a lot of talking, who I think is the leader, he calls himself Deathmaker. Troy says, "We got to clear this hospital." Billy says, "Hold on. Troy, I know all about what you have done, and how good you are, and I can understand why you want to take these motherfuckers, and I know that your family is in there. Troy says, and I know about your reputation for taking out serial killers, and I read your file, so I know you are a grade A badass motherfucker, just like me. Billy says, yes, we know each other. So I guess we got to get ready. Troy says, do you have any guns? Billy says, follow me. The deputies are loading up ambulances with the wounded. Doctors tell Sheriff Abby that the rest of the patients cannot be moved. The killers had been in the hospital the whole time, masquerading as the wounded and the dead. They start attacking the medical staff and the deputies inside the hospital. Chaos ensues around the hospital. A black Humvee with red skulls shows up, blasting necessary evil by motionless in white, and its Deathmaker wearing a red devil mask, and has two goth women carrying shotguns walking behind him. Deathmaker pulls out a red AR-15 assault rifle and mows down the sheriff deputies in the parking lot. Billy sees a handful of killers stabbing the helpless patients, and Billy attacks the killers and opens fires on them one by one. Doctors are getting mowed down by Deathmaker, who is walking into the hospital. Billy grabs Sheriff Abby, and they run towards the intensive unit. Deathmaker says, we don't need masks anymore, and Deathmaker takes off his mask and it reveals that he is not human, and he is a demon with horns, and the girls are also. Deathmaker sees the blood on the floor, and he licks it, and it's Sheriff Abby, who was hit with a bullet in her shoulder. Deathmaker sends his girls after them, and they pull out their razor blades. Deathmaker calls out to his followers and tells them the night is theirs, and that all the humans in this hospital are meat to us, and have their fill, and they reveal their true face, and they pull their flesh from their faces, and they are all demons. Deathmaker says to his followers, go get your meat. His followers start running through the darkness. Troy is upstairs building up defenses around the cafeteria. Alexis and Violet are getting ready for action, and Violet hands Amanda a gun. Violet tells Troy, O'Brien, I know you need to go out there. Troy looks back at Violet, Amanda, Kevin, and lastly Alexis, and he tells them, I got to go check things out, and I will be back. Troy pulls out his trademark, Colt 45, and goes into the dark hallway, and Alexis is behind him, and he tells her to block the door, and be quiet as mice, and if anyone comes in, that not me or Billy, or the sheriff, kill them all. And Troy kisses Alexis, and goes into the darkness. Billy is wrapping up Abby's arm, and Billy says this should be okay. Abby hears laughing in the darkness, and the emergency lights come on. Deathmaker's goth women are climbing on the walls, and Abby says, what the fuck, and Billy opens fire on the goth women, and they are dodging the bullets, and Abby pulls out her gun, and puts her back against Billy. Deathmaker's followers are feasting on the dead patients. Troy comes downstairs and sees the followers about to attack a pregnant woman in the dark hallway, and Troy whistles, and the followers turn towards him, and Troy says, well, this night getting better, and the followers run towards him, and Troy pulls his trigger, and blows one of the followers' head clean off his shoulders. Gunshots echoed throughout the hospital. Troy holsters his trademark, Colt 45, and pulls out his personal knife, and puts on his fingerless gloves. He motions the followers to come on, and Troy is cutting through them like a hot knife through butter. Troy grabs the pregnant woman and puts her in the closet. Troy continues through the dark hallway, and he breaks the glass and grabs a fire axe. Billy and Abby are being toyed with by the goth girls, and Billy tells Abby he is going to come to 3, and he wants her to run to the right of him, and he starts to count. Billy shoots out the emergency lights, and Abby runs to the darkness. Billy rolls one of the goth girls who growls at him, and she slides Billy's armor and his gun in her face, and he opens fire on her, and she blows apart like a balloon. The other goth girl slashes Abby's chest with a razor blade, and Abby unloads her gun on her. Billy walks up to Abby, and her chest is cut, but not too much damage. Troy goes downstairs to the lobby, and he sees Deathmaker standing in the middle of the lobby with 4 of his followers. Troy says you must be the fucking guy in charge, oh a fucking demon and your gals. Deathmaker says I see a human with knowledge must be a hunter. Troy says you made 3 mistakes. 1 # you target my family in your attack. 2 # you killed my brother-in-law. And 3 # you don't know who you are really fucking with. Deathmaker says and who are you? Troy says I am Troy motherfucking Alexander. One of Deathmaker's followers tries to attack Troy from behind and Troy cuts off the followers' heads. And to the left of Deathmask is Billy Hills pops from the shadows and says and you fucked with the wrong FBI agent. Abby pops out with her pistol. Deathmaker says I am Deathmaker, the bringer of death, I will eat all your flesh, and the followers scatter. A red van comes crashing through the hospital window and runs over Deathmask. It's Adam Hassan and his men. Billy and Abby run over to Troy and they run upstairs. Adam gets out of the van, and he tells 2 of the men to see why the power isn't working, and let's get Troy and Billy. 2 hours ago the FBI Deputy Director of Los Angeles Lance Zucker has reached out to the New York City field office to get them their best agent to assist with this domestic terrorist situation, so they are sending Dalton, the super agent Wilcox, who is the top agent, who is next in line for a deputy director position, and Dalton and his partner girlfriend Kristen show up at L.A. X is met by CIA agent Bill Stevens, who actually knows Dalton through his mentor Raphael, and he tells them about Agent Billy Hill and Troy Alexander. Dalton has been hunting Adam Hassan for the last few months, after he bombed a FBI office in downtown Manhattan where Dalton and Kristen was supposed to be but was elsewhere. The authorities in Santa Clara are spread thin. Billy and Troy were handling the killers, but now this terrorist attack needs to be dealt with as well, and all happening in the same place at same time. Bill Stevens tells Dalton and Kristen about the hospital, and they begin to start there. Troy, Billy, and Abby are running upstairs, and Billy tells Troy to get his family out of the building. Billy opens his bag and grabs ammo for his M4 and hands Troy an automatic shotgun. Troy says as soon as I get them to safety, I will be back to back you up. Billy says sure, goes back downstairs. Troy and Abby go through the 3rd floor and go to the closet where the pregnant woman was hiding, and he tells her to follow him. Troy knocks on the door and he calls out to Alexis, and Alexis opens the door. 2 of Adam's men are fixing the electrical problems, and the lights come on and Adam and his men are surrounded by chewed up dead bodies. Adam's men are frightened and Adam tells them to get ready. Adam's bomb maker Telly is setting up the bomb inside the red van. A group of Adam's men are now in the elevator to search the building for Troy and Billy. The elevator opens on the 2nd floor and a group of demons rushes Adam's men into the elevator. The men are shooting wildly and the demons are ripping them apart. One of the men pulls a grenade and his arm gets ripped off. He drops the grenade and the elevator blows up. Dalton and Kristen arrive at the hospital and see Hassan's men guarding the entrance with explosives, and Dalton's dead childhood friend Eli, who is among a group of ghosts that has been guiding Dalton since he was a child, which Dalton calls his council. Eli tells Dalton there are demons inside the hospital as well, and also tell him that Kristen needs to stay outside and she is not ready for this. Dalton kisses Kristen, and he tells her Eli says you need to stay here and call back up. I am going in there to get those people out there, and she has been recently introduced to Dalton's council, which actually saved her life before. Dalton goes to the trunk of the car and grabs his duffel bag and opens it up, puts on his radio to communicate with Kristen, and his lucky bulletproof FBI vest, his modified Desert Eagle and combat knife, and grabs an assault rifle and goes to the back of the hospital and sneaks in through the emergency exit. Dalton follows a blood trail inside a dark hallway and is guided by a recently passed ghost named Shannon, who is guiding him through the darkness. Song begins playing called Break Stuff by Limp Bizkit as Dalton sees a group of 10 green-eyed deformed demons near the fire escape, just devoured 3 patients, and the demons rush him, and Dalton drops his assault rifle, and pulls out his knife, and says let's fucking go. Dalton is delivering devastating punishment to one by tearing its head clean off, smashing the second one in a wall until its eyes pop out of its head. Third one comes slashing at Dalton's vest. Dalton headbutts it and delivers a super kick, and knocks it head off, then completely jumps on the 4th one, and the 5th one performs a wrestling maneuver, and quickly slices them up with his knife, and quickly grabs his assault rifle, and mow the rest of them down. Demon's body parts are flying everywhere. Song ends. Adam grabs a few more of his men, and arm themselves with automatic weapons, and are walking towards the elevator. They look inside the elevator, and the men are dead. Billy comes out of the shadows and opens fire on Adam's men, who are in the lobby, and Billy runs to the other wing of the hospital with them chasing him. Adam tells his men that are with him to guard Telly, and Adam goes with the other men. Billy comes running down the bloody hallway where Dalton has just mowed the demons, and Billy slips on the demons as Adam's men are on his trail, and they open fire, and Dalton comes out and saves Billy and mows down Adam's men, and Adam sees Dalton from a distance and smiles and says to himself, praise Allah, I get to kill all my enemies in one shot. Today is a good day to die, and Adam calls for more reinforcements. Dalton helps Billy up off the floor, and Billy says, who the fuck are you? Dalton says, well, Agent Hill. I am Special Agent Dalton Wilcox, here save your asses, and where is Troy Alexander? While Billy tells Dalton the situation, Adam and his reinforcements show up, and Billy reloads his M4, and says to Dalton, let's get this motherfucker. Dalton sees Adam and his men approaching. Billy opens fire. Dalton asks Kristen on the radio. She get in touch with the cavalry, and she says state police and CTU are on their way, but there is so much unrest in Santa Clara the path directly to the hospital is gridlocked. Dalton laughs wildly and looks at Billy, well, we are on our way. Hopefully Troy gets these people out of here, because these fuckers got this place rigged to high heaven, so we got to deactivate these fucking bombs, if not we all are fucking dead. Billy says, I eat pressure for breakfast. Gunfight ensues between Dalton and Billy versus Adam and his men. Deathmaker has been under the van the entire time, and now he slides out, and his claws are sharp, and he starts ripping through the men. Telly grabs the cell phone to detonate the bomb, and Telly is full of terror, and his arm is ripped off by Deathmaker, and Telly's face is ripped off by him. Telly's screams are going throughout the building. Troy, Abby, Alexis, Violet, Amanda, Kevin and the pregnant woman named Rose using the service elevator, and going to the parking lot structure. Troy breaks into a car, and tells Alexis to get as far from the hospital as possible. The bloody hockey mask killer shows up and grabs Amanda from the darkness. Amanda knocks the mask off his face, and it reveals that he is Amanda's old boyfriend Tobias, who was presumed dead. He has a hatchet to her throat. Troy gets out of the car. Violet says, let my daughter go. Tobias says, your daughter was supposed to die with me. Amanda promised me we would die together, and when I drove that car off the bridge, and as we slowly drowned, she had second thoughts about dying and she left me to die alone. Now I survived because of anger for your precious Amanda, and I pledge my soul to Deathmaker. Troy blows Tobias's head off his shoulder. Troy grabs Amanda and gives her to her mother and tells them to get in the car. Troy kisses Alexis, and Alexis drives off. Troy grabs the hatchet and arms himself with the jackhammer shotgun and walks back into the service elevator. Dalton and Billy are shooting it out with Adam's men. 2 more vans full with Adam's men, and Troy come through the lobby blasting at Adam's men. Bullets and blood everywhere. Billy sees Troy and he motions him to come their way, and Troy sees Dalton and looks at his vest, and Troy says, you must be the fucking cavalry, and Dalton smiles and says, I am. So let's end this fucking siege. Troy sees the dead bomb maker and tells Dalton and Billy that he is going to try to disarm the bomb. "I believe it's in that red van, because that's Adam's bomb maker," and Dalton says, "How the fuck you know that he has no fucking face?" Troy says he got the trigger in his fucking hand. Troy goes to the red van, and he sees the bomb, and it is coming down. 25 minutes left. Down with the Sickness starts playing. Adam's men are drilling at Troy with bullets, and one of the men pulls an RPG and aims at Troy. Troy says "oh shit" and runs towards the wall, and the rocket goes past Troy and hits the stairwell. Dalton unloads his assault rifle on Adam with the RPG, and Troy ducks behind the red van and gets shot at from both sides of the red van. Troy sees the timer and sets his watch to the timer. Billy is attacked from behind by a half-dead goth that Abby supposedly had killed earlier, and this goth girl is all covered in blood with a big hole inside her, and Deathmaker comes out of nowhere attacking Adam's men with his claws tearing flesh everywhere. Billy starts dodging goth girl attacks, and one of Adam's men, muscle-bound 7-foot-tall nicknamed the War God in Arabic, pulls a Gatling gun and opens fire on Deathmaker, Billy and Dalton. Adam shows up in the lobby and starts surveilling the scene, Troy hiding behind the van, the War God unloading his Gatling gun, and Billy uses his fighting techniques. And subdued goth girl decided to use her as a human shield, and he grabs the RPG and shoots it through goth girl hole in her body, and the War God sees Billy, and he unloads the Gatling gun on goth girl, tearing her to shreds, and Billy shoots the RPG, and the War God dodges, and a large explosion in the lobby, smoke everywhere. Dalton is blown into a stairwell. Adam gets injured by a piece of goth girl bone lodged in his shoulder. Troy is not affected, and he tries to disarm the bomb. Polygamous by Breaking Benjamin starts playing. Billy comes out of the smoke and is attacked by the War God. Billy and the War God are trading blows in a cloud of smoke engulfed the room, and the sprinkler system comes on. Billy is trying his best, but the War God is stronger. Dalton gets out of the stairwell, and he sees Deathmaker attacking the remaining men of Adams by shredding them with his claws and his teeth, and Deathmaker quickly turns. He sees Dalton and says, "You aren't afraid of me, Agent?" And Dalton says, "You are just another fucker. I got to put out his fucking misery." And Deathmaker tries to rush his Dalton, and Dalton unloads a flurry of punches on Deathmaker, and Deathmaker is despised by the power of Dalton. Troy pulls out his knife and opens the panel on the bomb. The timer says 7 minutes, and before Troy can disarm the bomb, a wounded Adam attacks Troy from behind and knocks him towards the floor and destroys the panel, and looks at Troy and says, "You killed my brother Troy Alexander, and now in less than 5 minutes the last thing I do be I die. Avenge my brother." And Troy quickly gets off the floor and spears Adam to the red van. Adam headbutts Troy and performs boxing techniques on Troy and slams him to the front of the red van. Billy is thrown from a distance by the War God. The War God picks Billy in the air and puts him in a bear hug, almost crushing him. Dalton pulls out his knife, and Deathmaker is dodging his attacks, and Deathmaker delivers a spin kick at Dalton and knocks him back, and Deathmaker rips off Dalton's vest, and Deathmaker jams his claws inside Dalton's ribcage, and Dalton is in agony, and he drops to the floor. Troy is bleeding out his head, and Adam is gloating and praising Allah for this wonderful day, and Troy sees Dalton is on his knees getting shanked in the ribs by Deathmaker, who is now licking his face, and Troy looks at Billy, who is being almost crushed to death by the War God, and Troy thinks about all he has been through, a montage of everything he has endured through his long career, and he shouts out to Billy, "Go for his fucking throat, don't give that big son of a bitch the sastification of killing you." Billy tears into the War God's throat with his right bare hand and rips out Adam's apple. The War God drops Billy to the floor. Adam sees and goes for Troy's shotgun, and Troy quickly gets off his ass, and Adam has the shotgun, and he goes to aim it at Troy, knocks the shotgun out of Adam's hand and shoot Adam in his leg. Almost half his leg is missing, and then Troy aims the shotgun at Deathmaker and starts blowing pieces off of him, and he takes his claws out of Dalton. Troy is putting his life ahead of Dalton and Billy by deciding to take on Deathmaker. Adam hurting with his fucked leg, But when he sees Billy getting back to his feet spitting up blood and Adam has a second wind and he tries to rush Billy to avenge his dead wife. Adam attacks Billy and Billy dodges Adam's attacks, and Billy starts beating the hell out of Adam, and Billy sees Adam's leg barely hanging on and Billy knocks Adam on his ass and stomp his leg until it comes off and Adam starts screaming and says to you have the right to remain silent, and Billy dragged Adam to the front of the red van and handcuffed him to the engine. The war god grabs a knife and tries to attack Billy from behind and Dalton yells out to him and says hey you big motherfucker, come try me bitch, and the war god with blood coming out of his throat rushes Dalton, and Dalton draws his Desert Eagle and blows the war god's brains out. Billy looks at Dalton and Dalton says, what I am not at 100% right now, I just some fucking claws inside my fucking ribs. Billy looks at the bomb, it's damaged, it has 3 minutes. And he says to Dalton we got to get the fuck out of here now. Dalton says, we can get out through the way I came in the emergency fire escape. Billy looks around and says where the fuck is Troy? Dalton looks around and Kristen is garbled on the headset saying state police, and our here CTU is en route, tell them that police need to keep away, this place is about to fucking blow. Billy picks up Dalton and they start going to the exit. Violent, Kevin, Abby, and Amanda are stopped by the state police. Abby is telling them what is going on, but keep the supernatural element out of it. The Death of Peace of Mind starts playing by Bad Omens starts playing. Troy is in a dark corridor of the hospital standing face to face with Deathmaker. Troy tries to shoot the shotgun, but it's empty. Troy glanced at his watch for a quick second, and he sees he has 2 minutes, then Deathmaker runs at him and Troy spin kicks the empty shotgun at Deathmaker. Troy dodges Deathmaker, and uses his kickboxing skills to subdue Deathmaker. Troy is hitting every combo he can think of to inflict the critical amount of damage, and Troy is breaking Deathmaker's ribs, and Deathmaker slices Troy across the face, and then throws his glass door, and Deathmaker comes through the glass door right after Troy. Dalton is halfway healed and Troy's dead brother-in-law David appears to Dalton, and tells Dalton he must save Troy. Dalton tells Billy to go to the exit. And he is going to get Troy. Billy goes to the exit, but he decides to follow Dalton. Troy is getting thrown all around the operation room. Troy sticks his claws inside Troy's leg and Deathmaker tries to slice up Troy's back, and Troy grabs a bone saw and stabs inside Deathmaker, and turns it on, and Deathmaker grabs Troy by his throat and says I am Deathmaker, I am immortal, and Troy has sawed Deathmaker in halves and Deathmaker falls apart, and Troy says, I am Troy Alexander, and you just died fucker. Troy turns around and Adam is standing behind him with Troy's Colt 45 with his skin hanging off his right hand, and Adam says time to die Troy Alexander. Dalton blows Adam's head off and Troy says thanks I owe you one, and Billy says, let's get the fuck out of here. Dalton, Billy and Troy are running out of the building and state police, Kristen, Abby, Violet, Amanda are at safe distance. The entire hospital explodes. Moments later Dalton, Troy and Billy are smoking a cigarette watching the building continue to fall to pieces. CTU units and state police. Legendary Jack Bauer steps out of his truck and says you guys are in one piece, and Jack looks at Troy's leg that looks really bad. Troy says I've been through worse. An ambulance is coming through and paramedics are looking at Dalton, but he refuses to be looked at due to his own healing factor. Dalton says to Billy and Troy it was one hell of a night. You saved my ass back there, I owe you, Dalton. Dalton says you saved my ass too, we are even. Billy looks at Dalton and says what happens now? Well, me and my partner Kristen are going to work at CTU, because Adam was just the beginning of this threat. As soon as it's known that Adam is dead, his sister Desi will come for revenge. Billy is surprised and says there was no sister mentioned in Adam or his brother's file. Troy looks at Dalton and Billy and says I know who she is, Adam's half-sister. She kept her relation to Hassan under wraps. Her mother remarried and kept her away from her brothers. Desi had done some work for Section 20. Somehow they reach out, and she has been MIA ever since. Jack Bauer walks over to Troy, as he gets put in the back of the ambulance, and says we might need to bring you on the task force to help bring in Desi. Moments later, Troy arrives at the hospital. Alexis walks into the hospital room. Alexis says to Troy, "Thank God you are all right." Troy says, "Is my family okay?" Alexis says they are okay. They are in a hospital in Los Angeles. They are being looked after by the National Guard. Troy says, "That's good. I need a vacation." Billy pops his head in the room and says, "I was just checking on you, but it seems you are all good here. I owe you a drink, Troy." Troy says, "We will get that drink one day," and Billy shakes Troy's hand and leaves Troy's alone with Alexis. Billy is finishing his cigarette outside the hospital, and Abby walks up to him, and Abby says, "I want to thank you for saving my life. How about you come back to my place, so I can think of you properly, and cook your breakfast?" Billy says that sounds like a good idea, and Billy gets in the car with Sheriff Abby, and they drive off in the sunrise. End credits song, Ashes of Eden by Breaking Benjamin.